Next time they shine your light in the sky, don't go to it. The bat is dead. Bury it. Consider this mercy.
Tell me. Do you bleed? You will.
And on Independence Day morning, today, June the 12th, and we're supposed to be celebrating the Declaration of Independence of the Philippine Islands. So, happy Independence Day, folks. And today, we're gonna be talking about my reaction to the webinar by Doc Ligot on AI ethics. As you see, this is a very, very hard subject. So, without further ado, we'll start the, the stream. This was done last Friday, June 9, and let's listen to what Doc Ligot has to say. And yep, we're talking about safety, ethics, and regulations. Uh, let's see what, well, let's see what Doc has to say. AI is still a hot topic over uh, on the internet, on social media, and it's very nice to have this sort of topics on the classroom. As a backgrounder, uh, we've been talking about AI for
Okay, welcome aboard.
okay,
We are currently live
all right,
on Facebook now and recording.
yep. This
We'll
is the
start in
recording.
probably a minute. There's a lot of ground to cover. And besides, if people get left behind, I think they can just catch up on the rest of the topic. Actually, as I was sharing earlier over Facebook, I'm a little worried about this webinar actually. Only because the topic that we are going to tackle is not a resolved topic at all. There's a lot of open ends
Yep.
in this particular topic, and at the same time, there's a lot of conflicting opinions. So it's going to be quite ambitious for us to be able to cover it all in a little under an hour, but we'll try our best. Okay, I think we can start. So welcome everyone. This is webinar number 3, but episode 2, because we started with episode 0 of AI for Lunch. And we're going to be back on our regularly scheduled webinars. However, maybe for the next few webinars, because of scheduling conflicts, we might actually have it on a weekend. I don't know if that's going to be better or worse, but I'd like to get over all of the planned topics within June, because there could be more topics based on the feedback in past webinars. there could be other topics that will be relevant beyond the topics that we discussed already. So this episode will be about AI ethics, safety, and regulation. So this is a topic that's been in the news, in the blogs, on LinkedIn, on social, and I
Okay.
thought this is really a good time to just get a grip on all of the hype around AI. As I mentioned before, the hype in AI seems to be negative compared to other technology trends. So let's see why that is potentially the case. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Doc Ligot. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been working in the data field for more than 20, going on 25 years actually, and in AI, a little under 10 years. I started out as in banking, so that's my banking look right there. And then after almost 14 years in banking, I went into IT and then started my company. So, for those of you who've been watching this series for the past few, probably a month, um, why am I doing this? Again, this is really a public service. So I'm not charging for this.
Yes.
My intention is to spread broad awareness
This
on
is a
AI.
free
It's targeted
free
both to technical and
webinar.
non-technical audiences. So I try my best to keep the terminologies very simple, but try not to lose the essence of what we're discussing. It's really to spur discussion and practical adoption of AI. That's really my mission now. I've decided to dedicate the, the remaining productive years of my life, which hopefully is still a lot, towards encouraging adoption of AI in the Philippines. And adoption is a function of information and education. So here we are. I also want to address a lot of the alarmist claims about AI. So as I said, it's very negative now about AI. So I want to understand why that is. And this is also, there's only so much we can discuss in an hour or less. So this is really an 18,000 feet view. Most of the material here, I've tried my best to put references, but I've also mixed up my personal views as well. All of this is public and open source, so feel free to reuse it in your own education, or if you want to reshare it. And this webinar is live streamed on Facebook, and it will be uploaded in YouTube in a quick fashion. So those links are also open for sharing. And definitely, I welcome feedback on the whole series. And if you want to discuss any topic, once the series is over, I'm open to additional topics because there's just so much about AI that hasn't been discussed yet. And some people have suggested changing the format into something like a podcast or an interview. Yes, I actually plan to do that, but I wanted to get a lot of the preliminary material out first, so that's why I'm just doing it by myself. And then later we can revisit some of the topics, maybe in conversation with someone else. Okay, so the registration for this episode, I don't know if it's because we missed a week, was lower than the previous. So I'm wondering if that's because of the topic, because the topic sounds very dry, and it's something that people don't want to talk about. But still, the people who registered, interestingly, a big chunk come from the education sector, and almost equal parts in the other sectors. So professional services includes consulting, may finance, some doctors, hospitals, but the chunk is education. And the pop question for the registration was, what kind of regulation feels attractive to you, for one reason or another? And
No
majority
regulation.
said actually guidelines and education. So this is like soft regulation. I'll discuss this later. A few people mentioned licensing and clinical trials or documentation and transparency. I mean, these are all good. In fact, if you look at the industries that mentioned licensing and documentation, they actually come from the academe. But everyone else seemed to really say we need guidelines, not necessarily hard regulations. So guidelines like the ISO certification, something like that. So it's more of a reward if you achieve, or uh, parang code of conduct. And of course, they want more people to learn. And I think that makes sense because it's really going to be hard to regulate something you don't understand. And I made a mention of that in the first webinar. We're certainly regulating out of fear, and we shouldn't do that. In terms of the keywords coming out, it's very consistent. People mentioned ISO, standards, education. Finland came up, and there's actually a context for this. Um, I think in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, right before the pandemic lockdowns, the Finnish government made an announcement that they were targeting to educate 1% of people in Finland in artificial intelligence. And they actually quickly accomplished that goal. So now their current goal is to educate 1% of European citizens of the EU in AI. And I really find that very inspiring and fascinating, very encouraging. Can you imagine if 1% of Filipinos understood AI? It's about more than a million. What kind of
Yeah.
innovation that might spur? So in my head, that's also something that I'd like to pursue. Okay, so let's get to it. So another rabbit hole, so to speak. So for AI ethics, safety, and regulation, I chopped up the topic into four parts. First, I'll talk about something that might be hard to understand. So I'm going to try my best to break it down into terms that everyone can relate to. And this is the alignment problem. This is really the core issue that most
Okay.
people who are advocating for AI regulation or lobbying for, some sort of ethics committee, they're really worried about alignment. So it's good that we tackle alignment na. Let's understand what that is. Then, as an extension of that, I want to also focus on how ChatGPT was actually built, because most people they use it, but they might not understand how it actually was trained, vis-a-vis other types of machine learning or AI. No? So ChatGPT isn't even people who actually work with machine learning may not be familiar with how it was trained. So
Okay.
it's very good to understand it because it's very connected to how the alignment problem works. And then I want to dive into algorithms because ChatGPT is not the first algorithm we've dealt with. So just to run down, uh, what are the observed safety issues already with existing algorithms, and that will pave the way for the last part, which is I want to discuss somehow how do you approach regulation and vis-a-vis ethics, because ethics and regulation are not the same thing.
Okay.
Being ethical doesn't mean just following the law. You have to actually go beyond the law. And funny
That's
enough,
true.
following the law doesn't necessarily make you ethical, because there
Yes.
are some people who stay legal within the law, but they're actually getting away with unethical stuff. So if you find that interesting conflict, let me know what you think. Okay, so the backdrop of this really is the recent news, no? So this is all within the last month. Parang all of the AI experts, the godfathers of AI, have suddenly come out in public. So see, Jeff Hinton is one of the longtime pioneers in machine learning. He actually quit his job at Google, and now he's talking openly about an urgent problem with AI, more urgent than climate change, almost akin to nuclear Armageddon. Ganun sila magsalita. And then Sam Altman, the cool CEO of OpenAI, who developed the company that developed ChatGPT, has also appeared in front of the Congress, and he was talking about regulating AI. So that's funny, the top developers are also the ones lobbying for regulation. And I want to contrast this with just probably a year or two ago, no? So when Elon Musk took over Twitter, right around the same time ChatGPT became public, the first thing he did was fire the ethical AI team from Twitter.
Okay.
Diba? And of course,
Hmm.
the talk there was, well, they're cost cutting, and the ethical AI team, wasn't really adding value. Yeah, but it felt weird, no, as an optic to be cutting an ethics team, especially with regards to Twitter, which is a hotbed for disinformation, no, almost as bad as Facebook. And then about a couple of years before that, Dr. Timnit Gebru of Google was also let go by Google, and she was let go after she started making her claims to the
Okay.
public about how
That's
the
interesting.
internal environment in Google was also unethical, particularly around issues of race and gender. And then suddenly she was let go. Actually, Dr. Gubru bounced back very quickly. She's now running an NGO of her own, or is part of another NGO, looking at these issues. So it's nice to keep tabs on what these people are doing. So ganyan yung ano, no? That's the environment. Suddenly, a couple of years later, biglang 180, including Elon Musk. He was one of the people who signed that parang letter asking for a pause in development.
Wonder why.
And we have to wonder what are they afraid of? Why are they doing that? And to do that, we have to deep dive first into kind of the nature of these systems. No? It's a shame that actually not many people are here. Pero sana over Facebook man lang and YouTube, people pick this up. So we'll start with the alignment problem. So what is alignment? First, let's talk about kind of the pop terms. No, you might hear things like ANI, AGI, ASI. So these are terms used to describe AI. I think generally speaking, it's more how does AI compare to humans? No, so if you are ANI, you're an AI with narrow capabilities, which is basically every AI that exists today. To be honest, yung AGI, this is AI that's already at par with humans. And ASI is super intelligence. This is AI that actually surpasses humans. To be really accurate, as far as I know, AGI and ASI do not exist.
Okay.
That's still science fiction. But oddly enough, in case also you don't know, that's actually the goal of these companies. So see Google, it's in a DeepMind, Google Brain, OpenAI. Their mission is to create AGI because in their minds, AGI is the last invention man will ever need to develop. Kasi once may AGI na, it will solve most of our problems.
Okay.
But then ngayon, 180 sila. They're saying baka AGI might be the end of humanity. So that's
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
interesting.
Skynet.
Pero to be clear again, unless further advised, AGI and ASI systems are just labels. They don't exist. Any AI we have now, even ChatGPT, despite its interesting abilities, is still very narrow. Then, if you remember, some of you remember from the first webinar, we distinguished generally two types of AI, no? The discriminative AI and the generative AI. So ano yan? Well, in a nutshell, they may use similar processes and data, but the way the AI deals with it is different. No? So this is a simpler way to view it. The discriminative type of AI, this is an AI that renders a judgment or creates a label, no, or gives you a forecast depending on the data that you have. So you feed a picture to the discriminative AI, the AI might tell you, oh, that's a cat or that's not a cat. So you give input or data, and then the AI gives you a conclusion, no, or a guess. While the generative AI works differently, you give the generative AI a data point, and it creates more data points. Like you give it a picture of a cat, it will give you variations of the cat, parang ganon. And then in the case of ChatGPT, you give it a prompt, like the word cat, and it gives you a picture of the cat. So uh, it may use similar math. In some cases, the algorithms are similar, but the purposes are different. No, so that's the big divide. And most of the AI up until recently in popular use was of the discriminative kind. So pag may nakita kang kunyari, it's used a lot in business, like in banking, you have credit scoring. That's a type of AI that gives a judgment on the borrower, whether they're credit worthy or not. Parang ganun, no? Or you can do mga time series analysis. You have like a trend that you want to forecast. So you give it parang sa financial markets, no? You give it data up until recently, and then it will project forward what the likely trend might be. That's also discriminative. While generative is like stable diffusion, you give it a prompt, gives you an image. Or deep fakes, you give it a picture, it gives you another picture. Parang ganun. And of course, the chatbot, you give it a series of words, sasagot siya. That's generative AI. Now, let's peel back the onion one more layer. What the mechanism that AI uses to work is machine learning. So minsan napaghahalo yung dalawa. Machine learning is actually the process that makes AI possible. AI is the kind of the overall system or the product. And sa machine learning, again, hopefully this doesn't confuse many people, there's at least three major types. Pwedeng ipagalo-halo yan, but for simplicity, let's look at three types of learning. The supervised learning, the
Okay.
unsupervised
Number
learning,
one,
and the
supervised
reinforcement
learning,
learning. No?
the
And again,
unsupervised learning,
yung more
and the
popular up
reinforced
until recently
learning.
were the first two, supervised and unsupervised. And then now, sumisikat na yung third. So what are they? Again, supervised learning is the process that the AI uses to do a prediction. So you give it some data, it makes a prediction. The prediction can be a classification, which is this thing on the left. Like you give you a picture of a cat, it tells you if it's a cat or not. Or regression, which is more of a forecast based on a trend. While in unsupervised learning, the main difference in the supervised learning kasi, you already fed the AI, or you fed the machine learning
Mhm.
examples of what you're looking for. So for an AI to determine what a cat looks like, binigyan mo na siya ng mga past examples of a cat na naka-label na. So that AI uses all of that past information to project, no? Okay, I know the pattern of what a cat looks like. Ito yung cat. Whereas in unsupervised learning, you don't need to tell the AI what you're looking for. You may not even know what you're looking for, because in unsupervised learning, you're basically letting the AI tell you basically the characteristics of the data. Can you group these data points into like clusters or communities, because I want to see what are the anomalies. So iba yung perspective niya. Sa supervised, you know what you're looking for, the AI kind of automates that decision. While in unsupervised, you don't know what
Mhm.
you're looking for, and the AI is the one that looks for patterns. They're both useful. They're used for different things, and they can be used together. So you might feed a data set into an unsupervised learning process, ma-identify na niya na mayroon parang three groups of, let's say, people, and one group ends up being, let's say, in healthcare, people with cancer, no? And then using that information, you can then create a supervised learning model na, oh, kilala ko na lahat na may cancer. Can you give me the odds that this other data point has cancer? Parang ganun. So in business and science, there's a lot of work being done in this space. No? Now, what's reinforcement learning? Reinforcement learning is it works differently. It's about giving an agent the ability to interact with an environment. So this is probably the closest to kind of the traditional definition of machine learning.
Mhm.
So maybe these examples will make it clearer. No? Pag supervised learning, para kanina, you're classifying pictures of cats and dogs, or you have a forecast. While in unsupervised learning, you're giving the algorithm some data points, and bahala siya maghanap ng groupings. While reinforcement learning, it became popular sa games. No? So if you've heard of AlphaGo, this is the the AI that beat yung top Go player. And this is the AI also that started playing Atari games and trying to figure out new ways of beating the games. No? So when you think about reinforcement learning, in my view, this is probably the closer to the Hollywood AI that people are worried about. Kasi nag-iisip na siya ng sarili niya. No? And the reason for that is the way the algorithm is designed. It's
Mhm.
basically an interaction between an agent and an environment. So may mga rules kang ilalagay. Like in chess, the environment is the chessboard,
They can
and the
predict
rules are how the pieces move.
as
And the agent will decide what is the fastest way to checkmate the opposite color. And yung checkmate na yan, that's called a kind of a reward. You're giving the machine parang an incentive, like a score. And the role of the algorithm is to maximize that score. Or actually, maraming ways of defining a goal, pero just for simplicity's sake, yan yung ano niya, yung goal niya. Now, the reason why I went to some detail to describe all of this is
Mhm.
because this is where the fun begins, no? When you have these automated algorithms thinking like this, how could they go wrong? No? So one way we can look at is misclassification. Parang this is a classic ano. Is it a puppy or a bagel? Kasi mukhang from far away, pareho lang sila. And actually, the machine learning makes the mistake. Kasi it only uses visual cues. No? Doesn't know how to tell the difference between a dog or a pastry. Ito yung mas malala. Is it a chihuahua or a raisin bread? Kasi the data is from an absolute, kasi pretend you don't know anything about chihuahuas and raisin. All you had to go with was the photo. You will really misclassify. So this is a natural limitation of basically any machine learning. You're only as good as the data that you feed it. No? Another limitation of machine learning, because they're based kasi on mathematics. That's the charm, no? A problem is math doesn't necessarily represent reality. It's kind of a contrived model. That's how math works. So itong example on the left, one of my favorites. This is an illustration of how a forecast can change depending on the data na pinifeed mo. So as more and more data gets fed, the red line, which is the forecast, gets more accurate. Pero the only time the red line was actually accurate was dun na sa dulo, where you had most of the data already. At the start, If you remember yung COVID pandemic, everyone was putting out forecasts right and left. Talagang you have to expect those forecasts are flawed, which is sometimes kind of a humbling experience kasi if you're used to doing forecasts, syempre, sanay na sanay ka with data, by definition, all forecasts are wrong up until the end. No? And then itong, if you can read this on the diagram on the right, this is called Anscombe's quartet. No? It's a classic illustration in statistics where in statistics kasi you have all of these measures, no? Correlation, mean, variance, etc. And the way Anscombe designed it is all of these four examples have the exact same correlation, mean, variance, or maybe it's slightly different. Pero yung itsura ng data iba-iba. If you look closely, no?
Mhm.
Lahat sila 81 correlation, lahat sila mean of 9, variance of 11. And then the line also is exactly the same. The equation is exactly the same. Pero if you look at the layout of the dots visually, they're different things. So yun yung danger. If you rely too much on mathematics, that's the danger. You're by definition not capturing reality, and you could make very big mistakes. And fortunately, when you have machine learning and AI, the automation is based on math. So you carry that issue forward. What could happen? So pag nasa reinforcement learning ka na, that's where it becomes crystallized. So this is an illustration of an agent playing a game. So the boat is meant to accumulate as many points as possible by going through a racetrack. Pero natutunan ng machine na you can accumulate unlimited points by never finishing the track and just getting all of the bonus items. Yun yung ginagawa niya. So over time, nung pinaulit-ulit yung game sa kanya, yung goal was just simple, maximize the number of points you can get. It found a totally different solution to what people were expecting. And that is the alignment problem in a nutshell, where if you give a machine, an automated algorithm, a goal, you may not realize how that machine will achieve the goal. O, diba? Think about that for a moment. So itong paikot-ikot na boat na to, it's actually doing the goal, but it's not accomplishing the intended objective of finishing the racetrack. Kasi nakahanap siya ng loophole.
Mhm.
And this is not an odd example. This is a common example. Every time you design an automated system, machines may find a solution that you did not intend. So this is an illustration of the alignment problem, no, in a nutshell. We're borrowing an analogy from accuracy and precision is where it came from. So in statistics, if something is accurate, it's close to the bullseye. But if for it to be precise, your guesses have to be near each other. So you can have something that's precise but inaccurate, or accurate but imprecise. And depending on the problem you're solving, one is better than the other. So ganyan din yung alignment. You can have something that's capable but not aligned, or aligned but not capable. What do these terms mean? So those who are studying the alignment problem differentiate between capability, or how well a model or an AI is able to optimize its function. Parang yung kanina, the boat, if the function was to maximize the score, now optimize niya yung function niya. Capable siya. But is it aligned? Aligned kasi is how well does the model reflect the intention of the modeler.
Okay.
So in that example, the boat was capable but misaligned. And this is where it gets really crazy because, some easy, hypothetical example. You give an AI that's, I don't know, let's say the AI has the capability to influence hospital operations. And you give it an order to minimize cancer cases. It might just decide to murder all of the cancer patients and it would have achieved the goal. Yun yung hypothetical extreme examples. Just to give you an idea of how alignment works or doesn't work. At the same time, I'm actually shocked many experts don't bring this up. There's a term called model drift. Ibig sabihin ito. By definition, if you create an AI or you do machine learning, you're
Concept
training it
drift,
on
data
an
drift,
existing data set.
model drift.
But that data set is a sampling lang of data in the world. No matter how big that data, you'll never capture all the data. And even if you did, the next day you're already a sample because there's new data being generated. So that's the thought. Now, the danger is when you say drift, the original model may not be accurate anymore because the nature of the data changed between the time you accumulated the data and then the time today. Or the data had quality problems. So, for example, if you trained an algorithm to maximize shopper experience, but in the original data set, it was mostly men doing the shopping, just hypothetically. But then now it's mostly women doing the shopping. So men and women's habits might be different. So the AI will probably make mistakes because the new data does not mimic the old data. And that's also part of an alignment issue where the environment in training no longer captures the environment in reality. And that's really hard to control. Your best approach there is to retrain the model. Pero most of the times, these models aren't retrained, with a few exceptions. No? Which brings us to ChatGPT. No? I hope you
Okay.
guys are still following. So, ChatGPT is an example of an unsupervised AI
Okay.
or machine learning, but was also enhanced by reinforcement learning. Okay, I'll explain what that means. First, let's distinguish between a GPT and ChatGPT. Say GPT is kind of the base model. It's called generative pre-trained transformer. It's a model that's designed to predict a word based on previous words that were given to the model. So you say I love, the next word is probably you, no? That's all that GPT does. Now ChatGPT is actually a process that's put on top of the GPT. It's a chatbot.
Okay.
And it was trained not just to use the GPT to predict answers based on questions, it was also trained to mimic humans. And that was to correct for the alignment problem. So, for example, a GPT can work like this. No, there's usually two approaches. One is tokenization, and one is masking. So, for example, the cat sat on the
Masking
blank,
and
yun yung token.
tokenization.
Based on all of the data that the GPT learned, it could give you mat, chair, or floor as the highest probability of that word. Or within a sentence, the blank sat on the something, that is a mask that could be cat, dog, or rabbit based on some probabilities. And that's actually all it does. No? And that's the problem. GPTs are only giving you statistically accurate language.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't understand it. It sounds like it does, but it doesn't. So the ability to produce an accurate sentence is capability lang. No? But it may not be aligned. So when they developed, the earliest GPTs were just like this. And that's why they were barely usable at that time. But then they added another process in ChatGPT called reinforcement learning
Okay.
through human feedback, RLHF. And what was that for? Actually, they did this to correct the alignment problem. Kasi nga ang nangyayari, the sentences were accurate statistically, but they were meaningless to the person asking the question, or they were not intended. So the life hack they did was, can we teach this GPT to write like a human? So the human is the template, okay? And of course, that implies some other problems, which I'll get into later. So it was 3 steps. I'll just briefly go through them. The first step was they actually hired humans to answer questions. So
Mm,
here's a
yes.
big list of questions, and I think they hired 10,000 people from Kenya or something. Please answer these questions. And all of those answers were put into a database. So it came from humans, no? And that was put in a model, to fine tune the existing GPT. Then step two, since the model now has examples of what humans said, let's do another round. But this time, let the model be the one to suggest answers. Okay, so kunyari here's a question, and then the model would provide 4 answers. But then they'll hire another set of humans. Can you rate the answers that the model did? So you don't have to answer on behalf of the model. The model's answering already. But then you let the humans grade the answer, no, in terms of how good they are. And that rating system was put in another model. That's the important part. The original model was just a fine tuning of the original GPT, but then a separate model was created to capture the scoring that was being done by humans. So yun yung dalawang point na yun. And now you have 2 models that can now basically fight with each other, because that's often done in machine learning. You have 2 models competing with each other. One model, called the policy model, will answer a question. And then the other model, the reward model, will rate the answer. And the policy model will train itself again and again and again until it maximizes the score. Parang yung boat kanina. So the reward is the score. And that's how they were able to train tons and tons of data very quickly based on an initial set. No, sounds very elegant, no? But this is actually didn't really solve the alignment problem. Actually, created more alignment problems, which I'll explain in a minute. But just to summarize, well, what I would call any other machine learning before this was very simple. You have an input and you have an output, and the parameter is what modifies the input to get the answer. And then you have errors. Kunyari, you're forecasting or you're guessing wrong. It's not a cat, actually a dog. So the number of times you're guessing wrong is an error. And then the way you train it is you keep running that exercise again and again and modify the parameter until the error is minimized. That's pretty much how most machine learning works. Pero sa RLHF, you have a third player, which is the reward. So not only are you calculating errors and modifying the policy, which is the original parameter, but then you're also influenced by the reward. So parang ganun. It becomes in a way, self-supervised at some point. Now, here's the challenge. The point of RLHF is to align nga with humans. But humans are also not aligned with each other. I think that's one of the big flaws with that experiment. And then the way you measure alignment, I think people haven't actually agreed on it. There's some proposals. So this was in the original paper of a predecessor of ChatGPT. No? Metrics are like how helpful is the model? That's based on human feedback. How truthful is the model? But depending on who you ask, the truth can be malleable, no? And how harmful or harmless is the answer. So as you can see, these three items, although conceptually these are, you know, they make sense to a person. Kasi nga we don't operate in terms of hard rules. We operate in terms of heuristics, no, guidelines. So these are examples of guidelines that you might give a person. Pero for a machine, you need to give it like hard, scores and facts. And that's the current challenge. So some problems with RLHF that have been documented. Number one, the labelers are not perfect. Some people in Kenya might label something good or bad depending on their preference. The researchers are also not perfect. So the way you design the study and the instructions, that can be completely biased and flawed. The choice of prompts could also be biased, because by definition, you don't know how every human will ask questions. And finally, the labelers are also biased in terms of calculating the reward. So on all fronts, your attempt to actually correct the alignment actually created more misalignment. No? So let that medyo sit with you guys muna for a few seconds. No? How do you fix this? That's the current debate. Kaya when people said, let's pause muna experiments, they're actually not referring to current AI. They're referring to more powerful AI. But the issue was, we don't understand how this thing can be corrected. So if you create more powerful models, we might not be able to correct for it. And the implications might be massive. That's kind of the science fiction behind the letter. But it's actually being misinterpreted by many people na parang any AI na lang can be bad. Yes and no. Or banning AI for that matter. That's also another issue. So maybe to contextualize it, so put RLHF muna aside. No? Let's talk about existing algorithms. How have they fared? So again, in a nutshell, any machine learning operates on similar principles. You have existing data, and then you have a mathematical process to learn a pattern by minimizing errors. And then based on that pattern, new data is created. Ganun lang siya straightforward. You compare all of it. Now, this process is capable of achieving a lot of great things, but then we have to now start breaking it and seeing where it could go wrong. So to do that, let's talk about 4 algorithms that everyone uses without even thinking. And many people don't even consider na AI pala yan. My favorite app is Waze because it gets me places. It's based on a machine learning process called shortest path. So given a network of streets, what's the shortest distance between point A and B? That's all it does. But you don't need to be a rocket scientist to use it. In addition to that, it actually considers crowdsourced data. So there are volunteers, you can volunteer as well, that they add data or modify the map. For example, sometimes sarado yung kalsada, this road is closed, or sometimes it's one way. Exactly that. No? So it's a very elegant system. No? I love it when it first came out. Now, I'm sure the creators of Waze didn't realize that it could result in fatalities. Like in the case of Israeli soldiers in Palestine, they were using Waze to navigate the back streets, no, of the West Bank. And of course, no one will crowdsource the location of the Palestinians. They ran into some Palestinians, which is a very, very
Yeah.
likely hazard going through back streets. And there was a skirmish and they died. An earlier case, which I love quoting, is in 2015. A couple was vacationing in Brazil, the Murmura couple, and they just misspelled the destination. They were headed to a resort in Rio de Janeiro, and instead of getting to, I don't know the name, parang Punta del Sol, they put Punto del Sol or something like that.
Mhm.
And that was not the resort. It was actually a slum area in Rio de Janeiro, and there was a gang war happening. So bad
Shit.
luck, and Regina Murmura got shot and died. So, if you're the developer of Waze, would you have found that use case? That's the hard part. Eh. It's always best determined in practice. No? And see some people dropping comments on the chat. Please continue to do so later. We'll discuss it. Okay, next example. Uh, Social media operates on the similar principles. TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, etc. They operate on the basis of similarities. And you try to find similarities with other users or activities. So here's a classic
It's
one. Sally
algorithm.
likes mojitos, and because of their data, the algorithm finds Susan, who looks very similar to Sally, so it will recommend mojitos to Susan. This is why social media in general is very hungry for data. It's a big privacy issue because it's a marketing tool. So
Yeah.
it finds data points that allow you to target people. No? Now, another case can be Sean, who also likes mojitos, and since Sally likes mojitos and Sean likes mojitos, maybe Sean might also like Havaianas, which Sally likes. So this two types of filtering is the most common way of recommending items, whether you're looking at e-commerce, recommended videos on YouTube, news feeds. One is user-based, one is item-based. Of course, the current practices is very ano na, no, advanced, but the premises are similar. So that's a very cool tool, very elegant. What could go wrong with that? Well, that's precisely the reason why I would argue that social media is very toxic because the only data you see is data you probably will like. So you're deprived of a more balanced information flow. That's why you noticed in more recent years, it's very toxic on social media, especially around politics. No, you're now in an echo chamber, and that's by design. It's not accidental. Pero yun na nga, people, from a marketing standpoint, it makes sense, but for everything else, it doesn't work. Like in the case of the Rohingya people, they're a minority in Myanmar. They were targeted for genocide by the Myanmar military using Facebook's targeting mechanism. And that targeted attack was undetected by Facebook for a long time, years, in fact. Because number one, it was using micro targeting, and number two, the language being used in the ads was not English, it was Burmese, which again, that's another AI problem. No? Yung model drift, all of these language detection algorithms were trained on English, and then the real data pala is in Burmese, algorithm won't spot it. So now you see about how that can be damaging. Okay, third example. This is a very complicated slide, but just in a
Okay.
nutshell, this is a typical facial recognition process used in, let's say, passport
Passports.
preparation, etc. So you have someone takes a photo, the photo is stitched, and then an algorithm determines if the photo is compliant or not. Ganun lang siya kasimple. The way the algorithm was trained was on many, many images. So this is like supervised learning. And then some images were marked correct and wrong. And then that forms the basis for giving you the instructions. That's very simple. How can that go wrong? Well, it can go wrong if the data you used was not fair, or it does not represent the reality. This is also an issue of model drift, or data drift, where maybe all of the faces you used to train the model were Caucasian, but the reality is you'll have a very mixed ethnicity in real life. And that's exactly what happened in the UK, where Richard Lee on the left couldn't get a passport because the algorithm thought his eyes were closed. But his eyes were just small.
Small.
Or si Joshua Bada on the right. The algorithm thought his mouth was open. But the reality was he just had big lips. So these are ethnic minorities that the algorithm couldn't figure out. The algorithm was based on Caucasian faces. So you can turn an algorithm into racist algorithms just by omission on the data itself. So that's also kind of hard to accept. And then I guess one of the most controversial processes to come out in recent years is deepfakes, where it's generative AI na rin, no? You feed an algorithm so many examples of faces, it can now replicate a face flawlessly. No? In fact, you can swap faces, you can match lips to audio, so you can make Obama say things he never did, or you can transfer styles, no, between one photo to another. So I like this face, but can you make her African? So it will find the kind of the median between an African face and that person's face. So it's really great for art and creative uses. But what if you use it for politics? No? This is an example of an experiment we did, just swapping faces between two politicians. You can even do swapping between dead politicians and live politicians. And I guess it's good for academic purposes. Pero can you imagine if the news feeds were dominated now by video that you couldn't tell was correct? That's the problem with this kind of technology. And in the past, you used to require really, really powerful computers. These experiments were done on a laptop, modern laptops na ngayon, 16 gig RAM, video cards. It takes under an hour to process. So think about that in
Freaking
the hands
Joker.
of disinformation agents. So as I said, all of these are old technologies, no? So what about the
Mm,
newest ones? The chatbots and the mga
generative
image generators, no? Well, of course,
AI.
one of the first things that people realized is the chatbots hallucinate. In other
Okay.
words, they're giving you statistically correct text, but it may not be actually factual information wise. And that's the reason for that is people mistakenly assume that the chatbots are retrieving data from somewhere. Parang database yan or Google search. They're not. They're actually writing original text every time you ask. But it was trained because of the RLHF and the unsupervised learning. It was trained on examples of real text. So it looks correct. Pero when you audit the veracity of the info, mali. And people weren't ready for that. So I think that's more of an issue of maybe bad advertising. People were not guided properly, and people were also maybe not tested because they kind of say, one of the first things that people said when ChatGPT came out is Google is now in trouble because people were not use search engines anymore. They'll use the chatbot, and I thought that's not exactly the use case for a chatbot. Although there are more modern, more recent chatbots that are actually using search engines already to get data and then interpreting it. That's not necessarily foolproof because some of the data you find on the search is also wrong. And then you have these unintended user interactions. Like there was a man who committed suicide. And hindi to ChatGPT, there was another chatbot. But because the chatbot was so convincing, so human-like, and that conversation went into weird depths that people didn't expect, the man went suicidal. And then this is very recent, no? The other day lang to. A woman marries a virtual husband. There's actually a service called Replica, which is a chatbot with an avatar.
Uh
And the
oh.
whole point of it is to have a virtual friend. If you don't have anyone to talk to and you need someone to talk to, maybe a virtual counselor, that's what Replica does. But the Replica AI have become so lifelike and so convincing. People have actually fallen in love with them. And that's what's happening. In the world of image generation, things aren't looking good either. So one of the biggest problems now is copyright. So
Yeah,
this
but
example on the right is
copyright
the
is
ongoing lawsuit of
protection
Getty Images
for
against Stability AI, or the creator of Stable Diffusion.
malicious
The idea
use.
here is Getty AI owns a massive archive of copyrighted images, and it looks like Stable Diffusion used that uh, repository. In fact, you can even see the logo, no, of tawag dito, Getty, medyo blurred. Kasi nga, the image generation AI are so advanced that they can use similar cues from an existing photo, but they're creating a totally original photo. That's actually the gray area now with copyright. It's not the photo, but inspired by a photo that may have been copyrighted or trademarked. But in this specific case, baka talo si Stable Diffusion dito kasi they also infringed on the actual Getty Images logo. So trademarks are stricter. compared to general copyrights, because any modification of a trademark can be, can be construed as an infringement. But the whole idea here was, did you technically copy an image or just got inspired by it? That's the debate. And in fact, interestingly, Japan, the government of Japan, just a week ago, declared that AI will not be subject to copyright law in Japan, at least the training part. So companies, or what do you call this, the countries are going to weigh on this one way or another. We actually have a pending House bill right now that looks to ban any website using generative AI that infringes on an artist. I mean, on paper it sounds good,
On paper, it
but
sounds
who's going
good,
to
but
judge whether it was an infringement or not? Like a censorship question mark. And then some of these image generators are so realistic that if you didn't know it was satire, you might have actually thought it was true. So this is an example of a series of images that an online an AI artist online or shared around. It's these famous characters in Divisoria, Biden and what's this, Prince William having taho or having isaw. Everyone, well, at least most people I know knew it was satire. But what's the fine line between satire and disinformation? That's the question. So, for example, this image on the right, this was actually called out by some journalists as kind of fake news. And you can tell because for some reason the image generators occasionally get the fingers wrong.
yes,
A policeman has 6 fingers. Pero it was done at the height of the France riots, no?
the
So
French
how do we
riots.
know this was not satire, but the Biden one was satire? Hard, no? That's the challenge. And then now, more recently, we have music already being invaded by AI. So there's a song that was not done by Drake, but it was done in the style of Drake. I don't know the title of the song, "Heart on My Steve" yata, or something like that, and it went viral. No? And that was the surprise. People thought, oh, AI generated music can't compete with actual musicians. Nope, it can. To the point that the music label who handled Drake
The
requested that
music
that
labels
AI
will be
generated
the
song
ones who
be taken down.
police
No? So is
such
that correct or
stuff.
not? And then this is literally last night. People are filling in voices of dead Beatles, no, in songs and recreating the Beatles songs based on learned audio. That's interesting, no? So again, this is an ongoing debate. It's not settled yet. And actually, I'll have a webinar about art and education in a couple of weeks. So maybe we'll tackle it there. But here's the if the question is there any copyright infringement? Maybe that's a viable discussion. But the question is, in some cases, is it considered art or music? That's more of a subjective issue.
Yep.
Okay, so let's bring it to kind of the crux of this. No? All of this points to kind of a need to come to some common ground in terms of how do we now use these technologies. No? I mean, recall that after World War II, there was the Geneva Convention and Geneva Protocol, basically to govern warfare.
Yeah.
And the reason there was after World War One and Two, people were shocked at the amount of bloodshed at that time, no, that the world experienced, culminating in the Hiroshima, Nagasaki, atomic bombs. So they said we have to regulate all of these weapons, and weapons of mass destruction, which are also not just nuclear, no, biological weapons, have to be banned and controlled. So our people are saying, are we now at that level with AI? So I mentioned earlier, parang a year or two after Elon Musk fired his ethics team in Twitter, he's now one of the people calling for a pause on AI, citing profound risks. No? And then si Sam Altman was the CEO of OpenAI, appeared in front of the Congress of the United States, also saying regulate. But then people can't help but wonder, is this just a ploy to monopolize the AI market? No? So
That could be.
it's one thing to say we need to control this technology, but by regulating future research, they've already locked in their dominance. No? That's a
Yes.
conspiracy theory. Again, I don't know, but ano pa yan? Hindi pa decided. But let's go into some practical questions. No? So that's why we included some of those in the questionnaire when you registered. When you say regulate, what do you really mean? Are you here to license people who are using AI, or treat it like building codes or building permits,
It
or
sounds like it.
diba? Or are you more about regulating the development, like in drugs? No, drugs is probably the most extreme version of this. For a drug to come out, it has to pass through several mandated trials, no, for safety and efficacy. And then when you get to the implementation, the professions are also split. The doctors can prescribe, but they can't dispense. The pharmacist can dispense, but not prescribe. So that was an intentional separation of duties to prevent abuse. Otherwise, doctors will be drug addicts. No? Some of them are, because they'll be prescribing medicines to whoever they want and getting the medicines. Are we talking more softer regulations like documentation and audit, like the PIA of the National Privacy Commission? That's not necessarily like a hard requirement, but you can use it as a hard requirement for procurement. Like, okay, if something funny comes out, you can review was the PIA accomplished, especially if it processes information. Like very recently, I shared an article about the national ID of the Philippines, and
Hmm.
apparently it doesn't seem as secure as we all thought. So one of the first things you can ask as a citizen, can we see the privacy impact assessment? Because we assume somebody, did the due diligence there. So it can be an audit tool. Are we talking more guidelines like ISO? So ISO is not necessarily a legal requirement, but again, you can impose it on procurement. Like, okay, we will only source AI from ISO certified vendors, and that assumes there's an ISO standard for AI. Actually, there is. It's being drafted. Or is it more like a code of conduct with, members of an association like AAP, or like Data Privacy Act? It's a law, but it actually prescribes kind of steps that people can take in order to secure privacy data, or the IPO. Or are we talking education like Finland or Project Sparta? Or social protection, like if there are fears that people's jobs will get impacted, do we give them insurance to protect them from that? Or do we go for universal basic income, which is a bigger kind of a bigger topic? The idea there is if AI will end up eating all our jobs, most jobs, and then creating massive prosperity, kailangan those two go together. So the jobs are eaten up, but because AI is so productive, GDP will grow. So there will now be an excess in terms of resources, which we can now redistribute to people. So dun manggagaling yung UBI. Again, I can't see it happening yet myself. Or is it a hard ban, no? Like punitive? You can't do this. You're illegal, like the cybercrime law. Again, I'm not advocating one or the other, but I think every time you hear someone say we got to regulate AI, just for diligence, you ask them two questions. What AI are you talking about? Because there are many types. And two, how do you propose to regulate it? Because just saying you need to regulate it kind of doesn't work. And actually, I've been in similar discussions very recently in UAP. We're actually drafting a position paper on this. And it's not settled yet, just to let you know. And then more importantly, who will enforce it? It's not like driver's licenses, you actually have to go to LTO to get it. Or building codes, you have to go to City Hall. So there's actually a central point of intervention. No? AI it is not centralized. You can just download stuff right and left, GitHub. You're gonna regulate that. So I think that's really where it boils down to. And again, this is not being political or anything. I'll just cite SIM card registration as an example. Uh, the premise was you want to prevent SMS spam and identity theft, so require everyone to get registered. And in theory, it makes sense because you have telco monopolies that you can use to enforce. But actually, the onus is not on the telcos. The onus is on the individuals.
Right, true.
Unless you want to ban all of the SIM cards already. And so far, so good. Still being extended. And more importantly, this news on the right, a black market in registered SIMs has already emerged. I mean, we should not be shocked. Every time you have a regulation, there will be people who will try to circumvent it. So how do you now address that? There's no rule. Ironically, the SIM card reg doesn't even cover that illegal selling of SIMs. It actually punishes the telco or the distributor of the SIMs if they allow a SIM to be sold without being registered. Pero yung mga nagba-black market, conveniently out of the picture. Okay, we're nearly at the hour, no? Apologies for that. It's really a lot of material to go through. But just want to quickly run through some of this is familiar ground to many of you who've been listening to me before. We have to bring it back to basics, I think. Moral hazard is one. It's a phenomena where if you have incentives to do bad behavior, then huwag kang magulat if people do it, especially if the incentives seem to outweigh the risk. For example, in drug trafficking, that's why people are drug mules because yes, you can go to jail if you're caught, but most of the time you're not caught and the rewards are massive. People still do it. And in terms of ethics spectrum, actually, I think this is already outdated to be honest. But this is how we've been viewing the situation for so long. Everyone starts at the privacy question, but then it's actually everything else after privacy that's the problem. Disinformation, ownership, discrimination, liabilities. I mean, it's really hard to sue an algorithm, right? And
Correct.
you can argue the person who wrote the algorithm is not directly responsible for its use unless we apply other types of rules. And then on the ground level, you have quality and data poverty. So essentially, data can hurt you and data can be hard to use. And then these are very hard things to admit if you're now in a data-driven parang society. And again, the laws we have, they actually don't cover the ethics issues. They cover other things. No? Looking at SIM card, anti-cybercrime, intellectual property code. And actually, this is a good indicator that we're actually in the fourth industrial revolution already because new laws are getting passed that are data-driven. I think there's a DNA database law that's about to be passed also. And a social media registration law na dinadraft ng isang senator. So I think the bottom line here is compliance is not the only solution. It is one solution. But the ethics is more, for me, more proactive. We need to agree on a common ground in terms of ethical behavior. So what does that mean? No? And again, I didn't mean to get into an ethics lecture, but think of these three things whenever you think about ethics. It's not just about what you need to do under the law. That's the duty part. It's also about consequences. What happens if you do something, legal or illegal? And it's about virtue. That's actually the virtue part is actually closer to religion. You don't have to be religious to be virtuous. What kind of character are you building? At the same time, there's also existing ethical codes that might be useful. Belmont is a good one, in my opinion. It's to govern bioethics and experiments in health and biology. And bioethics principles of Belmont are quite straightforward. Respect people's autonomy. Don't harm people, or if there will be harm, balance those risks with the balance those harms with the benefits that your experiment will do. And then justice. It's a harder concept to swallow. You have to look at how do you do it in a way that doesn't disparage communities.
Outside,
And then in
these are
2021, this is already
all
almost 3 years old,
abstract
UNESCO
ideas.
actually came up with a recommendation on the ethics of AI. I recommend you find time to read this if you haven't, because 193 countries, including the Philippines, signed this, and it's grounded on some fairly broad, high-level principles, and it's got a lot of recommendations that can actually be translated into regulation already. Of course, we can be selective naman. But in brief, the core values are about dignity, human rights, peace, diversity, and the environment. Basically, the SDGs. No? And then the 10 core principles, yeah, ito core values. The principles start with proportionality, which is balancing harms and benefits. No? Safety, just like you would be safe about cars, we have to be safe about AI. Privacy and data protection. Collaboration. So it can't just be unilateral on the part of the government. You have to involve private sector, you have to involve the academia, and minorities, no, that could be disparaged. Accountability and responsibility, transparency and explainability. This is actually a big deal, number 6, because the models being used for ChatGPT are hardly transparent and explainable. You can explain the process, but what's going on inside these math calculations is quite opaque. It's because of the way the models are architected. It's almost near impossible to track what's happening with every calculation. Oversight. Oh, so this is important. At some level, the machines will get so independent that you have to actually insist the humans are still consulted. And not everyone seems to agree that humans should still be in the loop. And the last three are about, I guess, the ideal society. We have to be sustainable, we have to be literate, and we have to be fair. No? I also want to share as one of the last salvos. So, uh, I was actually invited to support this group called the Ambit, so I'm happy to be
The
collaborating with them.
ambit.
Basically, I represent them in this kind of this presentation. No? They were the first to come out with this public petition aimed at the lawmakers. And these first five are there's at least 15 parang points that they made, no? But these are the first five that kind of the global principles. Carry forward the national AI strategy, which is a roadmap drafted by DTI as early as 2021. After
Mhm.
they drafted it, parang wala nang follow-up. That's my view. So why don't you just do that? Because it had a lot of good things in it. Establish a governance committee, whether it's an actual government agency or not, that's left to government to figure out. The UNESCO recommendations, just implement them because they're all good. Ensure that there's regional representation. This is a big problem I see everywhere in technology. It's always NCR lang.
Well,
We don't involve other regions. And we need an upskilling program. We cannot rely on the public to react to this properly if they're not educated. There are some early attempts at regulation. So these are the three that I've seen. Senator Marcos is
after
looking
these
at job
three,
impacts.
no other
He's
news
actually mentioning
come out.
upskilling. Pala. Not just about banning AI at all. No? It's more about training the call center workers to transcend their jobs if it's possible. Si Salceda
It's
is
all happening up.
lobbying against generative AI from a copyright standpoint. So if it affects copyright of artists, the government should be empowered to ban any media that does it. My question is always, how do you tell?
How can you
And then
tell?
barbers is going for a broader regulation, which is about consumer protection. So what do we do with that? So lastly, before we get to Q&A, this came from an earlier study in 2022 on the state of talent in technology. And this I found this graph very compelling. It's how much of the talent pool, how big is our technical talent pool, like IT and data science as a percentage of our population. And then on the right, the x-axis, what is our venture capital investment as a percentage of GDP? And literally, the Philippines is at the bottom left corner. We have some of the smallest talent pool. Remember, this is percentages.
Wait,
So
damn.
that's why China has a lower percentage. Mas maraming tao doon. But again, Philippines. And then in terms of investment, we're pretty much at the lowest rung, no, in terms of investment. That's interesting, no?
So
This is the single worst place to do any
that's
technology play.
we
And for
we're
me as a tech entrepreneur,
being
I kind of reject that notion, but the stats don't
we're
lie. The
being
top two
dumped
places, in
into
case you were considering, is
the
Singapore and Israel.
rock bottom.
So if you have a way of going there, go there. Okay, to close this, reality check. So the 6-month call for a pause in AI refers to more powerful models than what is in use today.
Okay,
Regulating AI is a broad term. So we have to be specific. What are we regulating?
true.
So if you compare to cars, regulating cars is easy since you have auto manufacturers. Kokonti lang sila, you can restrict them. But AI developers, there are many and they're decentralized. Any form of regulation can also slow innovations. We have to be
That's
very
true.
careful about that. We're actually at the
Yes,
bottom
we're
already.
already at the
So it will be
bottom. So
ironic if we're the first country to regulate AI pa, diba? But again,
that
there
would
could
be
be another way of
stupid of
doing it.
us to regulate
And I like using this
if we're
slide. No,
lowest in
I
innovation.
really and it reflects, no, with the audience we have. No, we probably have half of the original audience I had in the first webinar, and it's I think inevitable. No, this kind of discussion is something people don't like to engage with generally. Everybody's interested with data or ngayon AI. Some are interested in technology. Some are still interested in math, which is important. Pero really, ethics goes out the window.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a little over time, but this meeting naman is until 1:30. So for those of you who are still around, we can now have a discussion. But before that, please support my social
Yes, yeah.
media. I
Support
actually
Doc
came
Big.
back to Facebook recently after a 12-year hiatus. And the reason for that is I want to reach a broad audience, as broad as possible. I'm actually quite active on Twitter and LinkedIn.
And believe it or not, I'm actually on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. It's a very different audience. So usually I just post videos now on these latter three channels. But please, if you're on these channels, please follow or share. No? And then finally, I think we're done with three topics already. No, two topics pa lang pala. So we talked about jobs last time. We're talking about ethics and regulation now. And we still have at least two more webinars to go. So following the priority, we'll talk about business and use cases and tools next. No? That might be more exciting. And then lastly, we'll also talk about art and copyright. Okay, so while we're doing the Q&A, can I invite everyone to fill up the feedback form, bit.ly/AI for lunch ethics. All right. I'll also use this as the mailing list for the ones who want to get the slides. No? So if you fill up the feedback form, you can get a copy of the material. Okay, so that's it. Let's do the Q&A. So I'll do the Zoom audience first, but I also want to see what people are posting on Facebook if there is anything. So if you're on Facebook and you have questions or comments, please you can chime in there. No? Where's the link? Sige, let's put the link of the. I'll actually post a couple of links. So I'll first post the link of the survey. AI for lunch. Ethics. I'll also post the link to the Ambit. The Ambit is actually a petition, so please please support it. Dali, parang mali yata yung AI for lunch. Okay. The link is capital sensitive apparently. Okay, I got it. So here's the link. I'll also post the link to the Ambit, their petition. Okay, does anyone have any questions that you want to highlight? I'll read the comments muna. AI for lunch ethics. Okay, that's the link to the survey. So okay, let's go up. So I think Josh had a comment. I found ChatGPT meaningful in writing and optimizing codes in R. Yeah, actually, that's one of the best use cases for ChatGPT to become a coding assistant. So it's not just about general info, it's about coding. No? So that's good. I hope people understand it may or may not provide truthful information. Yeah, as we discussed. Don't skip the literature, journal article. Yeah, I think one of the best use cases, but I'll discuss this also in the next webinar in more detail. It's really good for outlines. No? If you want to get an outline, ChatGPT is great. Pero yung contents of the outline, I would imagine, is better if it's still human beings. For now, no? Okay, Paula said, this is why Waze can be unreliable. Yeah. Have you ever been led astray by Waze?
Yes.
You know, you've been sent to the middle of nowhere because of
the shortest way is the longest way.
The directions. No? So it's really funny. Okay, what else? Roland Banyes. In paper, it looks good. Sino to? Hi, Doc Ligot. What can you say about the recent move of Adobe? I think it's for survival. Because certainly Adobe represents, up until recently, the old technologies in art. No? I don't think Photoshop will go away, but a lot of the automation tools in Adobe could be rendered moot by AI. So it's good that they went into generative AI. No? But ironically, that makes it more dangerous because you can now integrate Photoshop and AI-generated data. And you can literally fake an image.
That's
and
really
it doesn't
dangerous.
look fake anymore. Yung mga manual adjustments kasi ng Photoshop, it is possible to detect it using image analysis tools. Pero the generative fill, I haven't checked personally, but I think that will be invisible na to image analysis kasi it will use AI-generated colors and cues, and that's almost exactly, if not exactly, like an actual image. That's why I usually don't memorize maps because Waze doesn't know shortcuts. No? Okay, Waze doesn't include special access roads. Actually, I don't know if anyone heard about this. I was trying to look for an example locally of someone who got hurt by Waze. There's actually at least one, the car that got stranded in the PNR. But I heard about this news a couple of years back where someone was driving up mountain roads to, I don't know where, Isabela or Ilocos. And they literally fell off a cliff. Kasi according to Waze, there was a particular part in the mountain pass that had a bridge. Kasi crowdsourced yun. But the reality was the bridge was under construction. And some of these mountain roads were completely dark. No, no street lamps.
Yes, my
So they
God.
fell and they died. But I haven't heard any mention of it anywhere. So I was trying to look for it. Josh,
Chismis.
when I started learning about NLP, I don't skip surveys anymore. Okay, that's good. Some people do, most people don't. Yeah, I mean, surveys is data gathering. As long as you're in agreement with what data you're being asked to donate, then that's fine. Okay, next. I think art styles cannot be copyrighted. The actual
True.
artwork is. Yeah, I mean,
That's true.
you can't copyright ano ba?
You can't copyright.
Pointillism. You can't copyright watercolor. It's
Yeah.
actually still the work. And that's why it's kind of a gray area in favor of AI. Because AI is not a copyright on anything. It's using methods, no? Pero yun nga, in the Getty Images case, talagang the infringement was on the logo. No? Josh says, governing body, who will it be? Yeah, there's a couple of suggestions. Barbers wants something called AIDA, Artificial Intelligence Development Agency. And again, if that's like
Another
Meta, I don't know.
another
Kasi are you going to be
fun
required to register models?
funneling
Parang
what?
NPC ba yan? All of your phone devices get
Well,
put there. It's
if you
doesn't
trust
feel
them
like it's
enough,
something
then
workable.
give it to
Okay.
them. But if not,
Not
well,
in the middle of nowhere, just in the middle of traffic. Yep. Tech training for AI literacy. Yes, actually, well, as some of you might know, I was part of the Project Sparta initiative that actually already ended, but it's being extended by the AP. We need something like Finland. 1% of Filipinos should learn AI. Not necessarily the coding part, although that helps. Like the context of AI, no? And that might go a long way. Adobe have been implementing AI since 2012. Yeah. Yeah, actually, companies like Adobe are probably on top of the trend, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's really inevitable that they will be part of this discussion. Okay, I'll put my link on Facebook also. People, wait, yeah. Okay, anyone else has a question? You can unmute if you want, no? Para you're also part of the podcast. Feel free to unmute or raise your hand if you want to be called.
Sir,
Yeah,
sir,
go ahead.
question. Sir, you mentioned earlier, right, that the statistics about about our country being left behind in terms of tech training and AI. So, based on that, will it take, let's say, a couple of years before we finally reach the level of Singapore and Israel, as you showed in the statistical data?
I know it's
you
hard
have
to
to
tell.
count. You have to
When
count
will we be at
the
the
number of
par with
people
Singapore? Parang ganun.
inside
If
a
you ask me,
certain
never.
country.
Kasi they're also going to improve.
Yes.
Parang the analogy was always how many years behind are we?
The problem we have here
I don't know if we'll ever catch up. I think the best thing we can do,
we,
this is kind of a sideways
is
parang
still
answer to your question,
our
is we should
foible.
focus on issues that are unique to the Philippines.
Yes,
Like, for
true.
example, the call center question is certainly something we should be worried about because it affects us. Actually, as it stands now, if you do an analysis of the GDP, there are actually three big chunks to the GDP right now. One is OFW, the other is call centers, because that's a huge foreign currency income to us coming from the offshoring entity. And next is manufacturing na, which is also partly parang BPO, mga PEZA, ano yan companies. And if you think about it, those three things are at risk. The call centers are potentially at risk because of the AI, although there are arguments that it's actually the other way around. Call centers could actually include AI and be more productive. So I hope that happens. The OFW problem, let's skip OFWs muna. Manufacturing has a problem now.
Yes.
The problem is we're not competitive anymore compared to Vietnam and Indonesia, cost-wise. And in terms of
wonder
infrastructure, also not
why.
competitive. Our electric bills are some of the most expensive in the
Yeah.
world, ironically. So, and our skill base is actually quite low. That's why there's no chip design and fabrication being done here.
Yeah.
It's only assembly. So a lot of chip makers are going elsewhere.
So
But
I wonder
sayang din.
why.
And then let's go back to OFWs. I don't know if you're aware of this trend, but countries like Canada are
Mhm.
becoming more friendly to Filipinos because they also want to build their labor base. So what are they doing now? No? And other countries will follow suit. They're actually allowing OFWs to bring their families na to Canada and live with them. And that will just accelerate migration. Like recently, they're loosening up a little bit on the visa requirements. The intention is actually to bring OFWs to stay in Canada na hindi na sila OFW. What's the implication? Certainly, it's better to live in Canada for most people rather than come home. The foreign currency income will disappear because they don't need to remit it back home. So if BPOs are at risk, OFWs are going to get pirated, and our manufacturing sector continues to, di ba, to struggle. That doesn't bode well for the country's economy.
Yeah,
It's a perfect
that's
storm.
true.
So we need to think of ways to use AI to our advantage because at the end of the day, it's about productivity and minimizing human misery. Dapat ganun yung inspiration. But so I think the regulation conversation can also be used for that. No? Like how do we get more innovative with AI? But again, we all need to understand it first para we can lobby
So
it
that's a
out.
problem with
So
our
it's a very
country.
long answer to your
Innovations
question,
are
JC.
Sir,
not
another
that
question.
supported and
Would because you
not that
mentioned earlier that
encouraged.
I think in your previous webinar that implementation is that AI is nearly inevitable. So will this also affect, let's say, the education sector, like those from the DepEd and the CHED, to update their curriculum to cater to what we call the rise of AI these days, sir?
When you say implementation, who
No,
are
what
you
I mean
talking about?
is no, what I mean is like knowledge about, let's say, how the chat GPT works, how you what I mean is yung mga chat GPT and yung mga medyo tech tech products that already uses AI. Kasi even in, let's say, sa and let's say in state universities and even in DepEd, nagagamit na po siya. So will that also pose a challenge na rin po to change the curriculum sa education?
We need to
Okay.
level up.
Yeah, that's why I reserved the webinar specifically for education. Pero to answer that here, it's already happening. That's why the teachers want to ban it. I'm actually a teacher in a school, and I'm saying don't ban it. You have to be creative and now encourage students to still learn. Okay, I talked about this in a Twitter space the other day. I think the reality, it's my opinion, that the education sector needs to face is that education is just so outdated. People are in school not to learn. They're just there to get their credential,
Degrees,
their
yes.
diploma, because it's required for a job. That's why people don't absorb any real education. And ang nangyari, even the way it's being taught is also very compliance driven. Or just submit this essay, do this quiz, get your laude if you can, and that's it. That's not education. That's bureaucracy. And then if you think
That's like
about the way
a
education works
drone.
today, and this is irrespective of country, it takes you 16 years of training to be functional in the world. Parang ganun, di ba? K to 12 plus 4. If you want to take masters plus 4 pa, so 20 years. Anything you studied 20 years ago is probably outdated today, lalo na with the speed of development. So something is inherently wrong with that picture. We should find a way to compress education to less than 10 years. That doesn't mean you let people work as minors, but you need to spend more time with other things. No? Number one, understanding how the economy works. Like, for example, I'll use myself. I only learned how the tax system worked. I was already working for 10 years, and it's because I started a business. I was not taught taxes in school. At least I don't remember. I wasn't listening. And that's just one of many practical things that
We need to learn
generally people are not
practical
taught. We're taught about
things.
other
I agree with
generally useless things. No? And
Doc's
then if you go with the
assessment on that.
academic path naman, you want to be a researcher, you want to be what? I don't know. How many of our PhDs actually are in innovation. Again, I'm putting a blanket, ano lang. Very few, I would say. Most are also there because it's a job. I want to be a teacher, therefore I have a master's. I'll be a PhD soon, so I can become a tenured professor because I want to earn money from being a teacher. Am I pushing the boundary or the envelope in terms of new technology? Meron naman. There are a few, but not all. I wouldn't say all. So that's a lot of brain power wasted in our education sector. It's compliance driven. It's not innovative. And then ganito na lang, if we are really going to admit, let's admit for a second that the future is AI driven, data driven. How many of our schools are actually equipped to do AI, as in infrastructure, systems, Kukunti lang. Maybe one or two if I can think of two. So useless then for you to be teaching stuff that you saw on YouTube if you don't have the equipment to do it. Diba? And that's ironic. That means 99.9% of our schools are irrelevant in the AI age. And in fact, some people are finding jobs na nga, even without a college diploma, learning it completely online, using online tools, using ChatGPT. So that should already tell you the writing is on the wall for education. But it's going to take a long time. Like, Ched had data science as a memoranda as early as 2012 yata. But it was only in 2018 or 2019 when the schools actually figured out, oh, we need to do a bachelor's in science, bachelor's in analytics, master's in like I co-wrote a master's degree in analytics. I'm not even from the education sector because they couldn't find anyone with practical experience. So I instead used that as an inspiration. Sige, AAP got formed and we helped certain schools get their programs together. But here's the added thing. No? I'll be the first to say it, maybe. With AI, you don't really need to code that much to get things done. You can use the AI to help you with the code. So we're already at the point where AI is probably close to automotives, no? Where the mechanic and the driver are two different people. You don't need to know spark plugs to drive a car. And even though you know transmission and change oil, doesn't mean you can drive in the Formula One. Talagang those are two separate occupations na. And I think that I spent the last 10 years of my life creating a process to produce more builders of AI. Yeah, Project Sparta, Masters in ganyan. But now I fear that we actually need more users of AI rather than builders lang. And these are people who don't even need to learn R and Python. So doon ako medyo, I feel disrupted. That doesn't mean the people we've produced are useless, but I'm sure some of you would be the first to admit the people who know coding and data science actually struggle with problem solving. I'm being generalistic lang. Of course, there are exceptions. Because they spent most of their time learning that thing and not learning the practical things that the businesses go through. Kaya the businesses struggle with programmers. Because I've been in both camps. I'm a business owner and I was also a coder. Hirap talaga to translate. You're lucky if you're one of the few who can do both. But actually, it's hard. So we need more people with critical thinking, problem solving. But then if most of the people are studying if, then, and for loops, when are they going to learn that? No? That's probably where AI should come in.
Hooray.
Sorry for the rant. No? We have 5 minutes left to 1:30. So anyone else has a question you want to put up? Okay lang ba yun, JC? I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, sir.
Medyo no? Heavy. Wait, about regulation naman, we'll have another webinar for education. Anyone want to suggest how we should regulate AI? I'm definitely not going to be the one to encourage it, although I'm the one compiling the...
I'm not gonna recommend
sorry,
regulation.
who wants to say anything? Wala? Here's a good trivia, no?
Sir, question
Yeah,
po.
sige. Go again.
What do you know exactly about Exemplify? I don't know kung AI po ba siya. Kasi
Can you put it in the chat? Tingnan natin. I've never heard of it. I know Perplexity. It's a new chatbot. In the next webinar, it's all about tools lang. So malulunod kayo sa mga tools. No?
Exemplify.
Exemplify.
Yung ginagamit nung yung pre-post ni Justice Leon dun sa best bar ever. I don't know if you're familiar with that po. Yun yung
first time to hear about it. I'll look into it. So ano siya in a nutshell? Can you share?
Ano po siya? Yung parang it's like yung
Learning
tawag dito?
assessment.
Parang Parang sa bar exam po. But
Ano
it's
siya?
actually more,
Chatbot for the bar exam? Parang ganun?
parang ganun po.
Okay. That's cool.
I don't know, ano kung, parang, ano thoughts niyo po dito if you, kasi I don't know kung AI, if we would categorize it under AI po
Up.
eh.
I tried searching for it, di ko siya makita. But yeah, I'll look into it. Baka iba lang yung spelling. I haven't heard of it, but I'll look into
Okay.
it.
Sige, sige. Thank you, sir.
I think generally, here's another thing, which I plan to tackle in
Exams
next
of.
webinar is we were all, I think, we were all expecting manual laborers to get displaced first. Diba? Parang robotics, factories are going to get automated. Some are. Pero ironically, it's the white collar work that has gotten disrupted. Copywriting, graphic design, photography, and education. And that should give you an idea of the disruption talaga. People were caught literally with their pants down with this thing. And then, okay, to give you some context then, syempre ChatGPT was released to the public in November. Sometimes you wonder why they did it. And I have a theory kasi si OpenAI was founded by Elon Musk, no? But he left kasi nga he had differences with the current management. Actually, they formed OpenAI to fight Google. Kasi at that time, it was just Google, DeepMind, Google Brain. They had the monopoly on all of the top talent in AI. And they said, mahirap if one company has the control. So they created OpenAI to be a non-profit parang competitor. And then
Okay.
Elon Musk left. And syempre, he was the source of most of the money. So Sam Altman had to find other funders. One of them was Microsoft. But I think they had to release ChatGPT as a parang proof of concept, parang proof to Microsoft that this thing can work. And when they did, Microsoft put money in. And then nag-react naman si Elon Musk ngayon kasi you're supposed to be a non-profit. That was the design. Now you're in cahoots with a for-profit entity. So that's why I think Elon Musk is in the process of doing another OpenAI, yung X.AI naman. Pero for me, it's just fun and games lang for these guys. I'm uncomfortable personally that all the control on all these models is in the hands of a few people, and they're all in California. So that's for me is the ultimate ridiculousness. You can say that. Because no matter what we do to regulate it in the Philippines, we're probably inconsequential to that discussion.
True.
Unless we are represented there. Maganda yung founder of the Ambit, si Lian Chua. She's not here now, but she was actually a collaborator of mine in data ethics, and then she went on her own path. She actually is represented in some of these fora, in Canada, Montreal, IEEE, and hopefully in Stanford, because we need representatives there. So I'm also wondering, where are our AI leaders? Baka hindi ko lang nakikita because I'm too busy,
Being
going to
the
these webinars.
you're
But
too busy being the
where are
leader.
they? Where are the people who are supposed to guide us? It can't be just this. No, we need more broader. I mean, if
Yes,
you're an
true.
expert, please reach out to me. I'll help you get a platform. Because that's, I think, what we need. At saka, let's admit that this stuff is very technical at the outset. So we need to simplify it so that people can understand.
Understand it
Actually, the
more.
people attending this webinar, you're actually one of the few who probably understand it. So what about the rest of the human race? So I was at CNN kahapon lang and then the other day I was at Net25. Ano talaga, ibang market talaga yung masa. But I think they need to be represented because they're using these tools. They're using it to cheat. They're using it to create images. Some of them are using it for freelancing, for content creation. So nandyan na siya. Pero the way I would say the establishment, quote unquote, of AI and analytics, still very elite. Top schools, AAP. These are not the masa. So I hope to reach the masa nga kaya I'm TikTok. Pero even the way I'm doing this webinar, napaka-English. Dapat tinatagalog ko siguro. Maybe another version dapat.
Maybe.
Okay. One more question. 131 na. But maybe one more. Going. Okay, sige. So
Nice.
first, thank you for your patience. I know this was kind of a long thing. I mean, I'd love to talk longer. I'm considering a change in format because we were doing this mostly noontime, and I know people are working. maybe Saturday could work better and we can do it longer.
Okay.
So I'm going to do a Saturday run for the next one, and I think that might help. So let me know if that works. I'm also conscious about evenings because some people are also with their families. So I'll try either Saturday afternoon or Saturday noon time, so you have more flexibilities to hang around. Because as you can see, 1.5 hours is hardly enough time to talk about this. Tsaka I also want to increase the audience, no? So that's my goal. So anyway, in the meantime, thank you very much. Please fill up the feedback form. It's on the chat and it's also on Facebook. And then let me know your feedback on how we can improve the series better. And in the meantime, that's it, no? Episode 2 signing off. Episode 3 will probably be next Saturday. So
All
please stay
right.
tuned for that. Thank you very much.
So we have that's it for episode 2 of Doc Ligot's stream, and let's support this program, which a few of us are supporting. So again, subscribe to Doc Ligot in his YouTube channel. Subscribe to his other social media platforms over Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. And of course, subscribe to my channel. You're so precious to me, every one of you. So subscribe to Qatar Lal at youtube.com at Qatar Hole 5. And that's it. Subscribe, like, and share this video. I'm out of here.